Arlen. Thank you, Arlen, and I appreciate everybody taking a moment of their afternoon today to be with us as we present to you the challenges of school leadership at this time of the year. And so balancing the now with what's next, and looking ahead to the planning of next year, but also knowing that you have to wrap up this school year and those challenges that exist in just trying to walk that tightrope. And we'll talk a little bit more about a tightrope shortly. But as we frame up our session today, I would like to ask you just to insert into the chat. I'd like to just kind of know who's in the room that we're talking to today, and then I'll give you a little bit more information about myself. But if you could just put in your current role and then maybe a comma with your last day with students. Don't act like you don't have that already counted down. I know you do. So if you could just put in the chat your current role in school leadership and how many days you got left with students, or what your last date is. How about that? And I'll give you a minute to throw that into the chat. I'll include mine as well. Last day for students. Yes, May 29th. I'm seeing that a couple times. Here in North Carolina, we're going to be done. Our students are done on May the 23rd, before Memorial Day weekend. That's a first for us in many, many years, so we're excited about that. Yeah, I got another principal on May the 23rd. I like that. All right. June the 30th in Portugal. Kate, you're coming to us from Portugal. May the 23rd. Thank you, Miss Rodriguez. And some of you, I can tell, are putting your chat is to hosts and panelists. And so I would just remind you, if you would hover over that blue button right before, on top of the message line, and just put that to everyone so that all the folks can see your responses. As we get going today, we will be using the chat throughout our presentation and our time together. And so you don't have to put this in the chat, but I do want you to take a minute just to reflect real quickly on what's harder right now for you: the wrapping up of the 24-25 school year, or the looking ahead to the 25-26. So kind of get in your headspace, because as we talk about balancing the here and now and the what's ahead and what's next, it'll be good for you to kind of know what headspace you're living in right now. What's harder for you right now? And then, of course, the goal for today is to help you to be able to do both and not feel too overwhelmed. As a 12-year high school principal myself, I was a high school principal for 12 years, and I know the feeling of being overwhelmed this time of the year, when you're having to do all the things to get wrapped up for this school year, but yet you're also needing to meet with your teams to plan what your summer is going to look like, to plan what the next school year is going to look like. This is who I am. I am currently in North Carolina Public Schools. I'm in year 26 of my career, and I put in the chat that I'm an assistant superintendent, and what that means in North Carolina, I'm in a school district of 82 schools. And so we have 4 assistant superintendents that split up those 82 schools, and we report directly to the main superintendent and to the executive director of schools. But I supervise 20 schools, and I go in and I work with their leadership teams, their principals, support, coach, guide, try to remove barriers for them, and I do that K through 12. And I just came into this role in this past year. Prior to that, I was, like I said, a high school principal here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. Winston-Salem, Forsyth County might mean nothing to you. You have no idea where that is on the map. But for those of you college athletic fans, you might have heard of Wake Forest University before. Wake Forest University, home to the Tim Duncans and the Chris Pauls in basketball. But Wake Forest is in Winston-Salem. It's actually right down the road. I can see the campus from my office. Okay, let's jump right in. And we talked about, I said something about tightrope walking. I don't know if you've heard of the legend of Charles Blondin before, but Charles Blondin in the 1850s was a French tightrope walker, a tightrope artist. And in 1859, as legend would have it, Charles came over to the United States and he stretched a tightrope across the American side of the Niagara Falls to the Canadian side of the Niagara Falls, and a crowd gathered. Again, legend has it, there's no social media to capture this, but legend has it nearly 30,000 people came that first time to watch Charles Blondin walk across the Niagara Falls. And sure enough, he started on the American side, finished on the Canadian side, and the crowd goes wild. And he successfully navigated it, the tightrope. He then turned around from the Canadian side and put a blindfold on and walked across again to the American side. Crowd goes wild. And so the legend is that Charles stayed in the States and stayed at Niagara Falls for well over a week, and every day doing different types of stunts. He walked across the tightrope on stilts. He walked across with a chair, a specially designed chair that he walked across, and right in the center of it, he set the chair down and had a seat in the chair, right? 1859, Charles Blondin was mesmerizing. Matter of fact, that picture shows his manager actually did a piggyback ride and walked around and walked across the tightrope. Now, sometimes that's how we feel as school leaders, right? Except sometimes in the world of education, our tightrope isn't stretched nice and clean. And I don't know if you felt this in the past, or maybe you're feeling it right now, but this time of the year, sometimes that tightrope looks more like this. And I love this quote by Miss Kingsford that says, balance is not something that that you find. It is something that you have to create. And so we're going to spend our time together today talking about how we try to find and create that balance so that we can get to the other side of that chaotic tightrope, looking like this person: smiles, joyful, have enjoyed the journey of being a school leader, and still on that tightrope. Again, don't know if anybody's calendar this time of year looks this way. I would guess that no one has a blank calendar. Your day-to-day is pretty crazy. Not to mention all the reminders that you have in your phone right now. I know for me, I used to talk to Siri and talk to my reminders. I'd walk away from that conversation with the teacher and I'd put a reminder to Siri and say, I got to get in touch with Miss Smith tomorrow. Send Dr. Patterson an email by this afternoon. So Siri was constantly giving me these reminders. Everybody has a process. I've got a friend of mine in this business of school leadership that still carries the old-fashioned little book, black book in his back pocket, and he's writing it down, right? But your phone might come up with these reminders now. Do it now and do it all, right? Do it all and do it right now. If your phone's looking like this, chances are you're feeling a little out of balance. Now, everybody has their way of work, but this would drive me nuts, right? Matter of fact, I'm the kind of guy that turns the badges off on my cell phone because those red badges kind of give me a certain kind of feeling and a little bit of anxiety. So real quickly, give me a thumbs up, a yes or a no if you've got. Here's the number. Now, hopefully, God bless you, nobody's got 500,000 emails. But if you have over 50 text messages that are badged and unread, give me a yes or no. 50 is the number. That's the over-under, 50. Do we have anybody that has 50 or more? I see a bunch of no's. Thank you. So you guys are working in this balance, right? I'm seeing no's come up. Yeah. What about 25 unread? 25 unread text messages. And again, everybody has their way of work. Everybody has you have to find what works for you. Today, we're going to try to give you some strategies, and hopefully you walk away today with some outcomes. And here's the learning outcome. Yes, I like this. I like that, Valerie. You gotta answer it within 24 hours. I do like that. So here's some outcomes for today's work. We want to give you a practical framework that will help you prioritize and plan those important tasks, those priority, those urgent tasks. We want to identify some leadership levers that you can use this time of the year and give you some tools, give you some templates. We got some resources, and Arlen will put some of those in the chat as we go and go along our presentation so that we can share some of those resources that you can use if you see it fit, if it's something that you think will work for you. We want you to also walk away from understanding how to foster that shared ownership. Leadership can be lonely, but leadership done effectively, it's not a one-person job. Leadership has to be owned by several, and so being able to leverage your teams that are around you and being able to communicate properly your priorities this time of the year is important. And then finally, we'll leave you with some common pitfalls. Some of those areas that a lot of times cause that higher anxiety, keep you up at night, wake you up in the morning, and we'll try to get away from that reactive management and try to put some things in place. Now, what's going on this time of the year? I told you I was a high school guy and a high school leaders right now. You're dealing with graduation, award. All leaders are dealing with awards day, end of year testing, state exams, teacher evaluations, knocking out all of those observations. There's so much going on. And this is just a sampling, right? You guys have so much going on. What else is occupying your time right now? And so throw that in the chat. I'm going to give you just a minute. What else is occupying your right now? Okay, what's your focus this week, for example? And again, as you put things in the chat, scheduling and hiring. Yeah, absolutely, Michelle. Make sure as you're putting things in the chat, you have clicked that everyone. A big part of our time together is that learning and engagement from one another. Behavior, yes. In the South, we call this time of the year the sap's rising. I don't know if you have that saying in Illinois or not, but the sap is rising. Yes, I like that, Jen. Support staff evals, all the things, right? All the things that make school leadership challenging, all the things that make school leadership impactful, right? Because you want to dedicate enough time for your staff evaluations to really be able to move the needle for your staff, to give them genuine quality feedback. And that takes time to prepare for those meetings, takes time to hold those meetings. Yeah. Staff celebrations, absolutely. Field days. I attended a field day just last Friday in an elementary school. Absolutely wonderful. What's next? And I'm not going to ask you to put this in the chat, but I know that you guys have things that you're balancing for what's going on for next year. Here in North Carolina, we're transitioning our student information system. We're moving from Power School to Infinite Campus. That terminology might be familiar to some of you, but that transition means that all the master schedules have to be done much earlier. So our folks are dealing with that. Hiring staff, absolutely. PD planning. So let's talk about some leadership levers. How do we go about setting priorities? How do we go about clarifying the most important work? And I've used what I was introduced to me about 5 or 6 years ago was called the Eisenhower matrix. Some of you may have seen this before, but it's a 4-quadrant matrix that has important, not important, urgent, and non-urgent. And so there's these planning zones. And again, this is work that I would encourage you not to sit in a silo and do alone, although that can be beneficial for you to kind of think through it before you meet with your team. But this is, I think, something that you're meeting with your admin team on, with your instructional facilitator or your academic coaches or, your office staff, your admin. And with each zone comes either an action, a do, a schedule, a delegate, or a delete, right? So each one of those quadrants has the task that has deadlines and consequences. Those are important and those are urgent. we got to take action on those, right? Those tasks that are not so important, but yet they're urgent. Maybe you as the principal can delegate that, right? That's a task that doesn't have to be done by the school leader. You can jump in there and delegate that to either a teacher leader, a grade level leader, or an AP or something like that. And you can see those tasks that need to get done. They're important, but they're not so urgent. Maybe those need to get scheduled. And we'll talk about mastering your calendar a little bit later. But using the Eisenhower matrix, sitting down and communicating this with your staff, I did not have that in my toolbox when I started as a principal, but when it was introduced to me at a conference, I took that back and kind of made it work for me. And it is something that can be powerful in this time of the year to really prioritize, okay? And so again, not going to ask you to put this in the chat, but I do want you to think of it in your own reflection. Which zone is the most difficult for you to manage, right? Some of us have a really hard time with the delegation. Some of us have a hard time with the scheduling. But you think about your own leadership, how you're showing up as a leader, and in this season of the school year, what's your most difficult one to manage? And when you see those gaps, it's not until you see those gaps that you can address it. When you see the gap, then you can be addressed, right? And so here's some other strategies for setting priorities. Again, recognizing the leadership lever of setting priorities. We talked about using the matrix. It's important, I believe, to get what I call big rocks. What are some non-negotiables each week that has to get accomplished? And you can identify those by using that matrix, but having your team on the same page. These are the things that have to get done, right? And we're going to work together to make sure these big rocks are done because they've got deadlines, they're urgent, we've got to get them done. They got consequences if we don't, right? And then not everything can be at a priority. I love that quote, the old adage, if everything's a priority, then nothing is. That's so true. You can't stretch yourself too thin as a principal. We'll talk about that delegation piece coming up. But what are those things that have to be done by you, the principal? If that's your role, or whatever your role is, right? I know we've got some APs, we've got some other folks in the room, but what can be delegated out? Okay, let's talk a little bit about time blocking, what I call time blocking, protecting your time as a leader to make sure that you can keep that balance. Okay, this is an example of a master calendar, and I don't know if you can read that fine print. If you can, then you got better eyes than me, but there's no reason to read it because I really wanted you to just see the colors. This is not my calendar. Matter of fact, it's not even an educator's calendar, but it's one that I just pulled because I liked the coloring, okay? Again, a tool that I picked up. Now, we probably all use calendars, right? You probably all use your calendar in some form or fashion. Maybe you're just throwing appointments in there or somebody's helping you manage that. You have, your secretary or receptionist that's helping you manage your own calendar, but you're using it, and some of you might be farther along. It wasn't until honestly about 3 years ago that I discovered this through again, some talking to a veteran principal, and that was color coding your categories. And so in the calendar that I used as a principal, I would have anything that was involved with instruction would be a color blue, right? Whether it was a PLT or PLCs, whatever you might call them, whether it was observations that I scheduled, whether it was meetings with teachers, post-observation conferences, things of that nature, anything that was instructionally related and at its core was about building better instruction for students, I color-coded that, right? Anything that was HR, when I was setting up interviews, right? And you're doing anything with HR, maybe you're having some of those conversations with staff members that are needed, and sometimes this time of the year, as the SAP rises, it's needed, but those are HR meetings. And so anything HR, it had its own culture, its own category. And I brought up culture because I actually put in culture as its own category. In my calendar, culture was purple. And what things fell into the culture category? It was things like lunch duty, being in the cafeteria. It was things like being out at the buses or at the car rider line. The last principal job I had, I was at a school of 2,400 students with 140 employees. I could not, as the principal, be everywhere all the time, but I had to be very intentional about planning opportunities for me to help build school culture. So I would put it in my calendar. Everything went into my calendar. And then what I could easily see as I looked at a week or I looked at a month, I could easily see where I was spending my time. For this calendar, the image that you have, where's the blocks of time? The blocks of time are being spent in yellow. I don't know what those big blocks are, but those are blocks of time. You can easily see that purple's not getting a lot of attention right here in this calendar. And here's what I would encourage you to do. As you master and work your calendar, I would encourage you also to share your calendar with your team. Having your team be on the same page, especially during this crazy busy time of year, right? So if that's not something that you're doing now, as you kick off the next school year, get that level of openness to where you can share your work calendar with your team. They can see where you are. And the other piece to this, leaders, is your openness also welcomes their openness. And so have them share their calendars back to you. So if you are a principal and you got, at my school, I had 5 assistant principals at my large high school, but some of you might just have 1, and that's fine. But being able to see how they're spending their time, not only it's not micromanaging, it's being on the same page. How you frame it is I'm framing it as we're making sure we're communicating and on the same page. But there's also a level of accountability there on how they're spending their time. Strategies for time blocking. I'm not going to go over each one of these. You can read these. I will talk about theme days. This time of the year, you guys have mentioned it, you're doing hiring. So can you set up and kind of block off a day? For me, it was usually Tuesday afternoon. So after lunch on Tuesdays, and we would go well after the school dismissal at times, but folks knew that Spainhour was going to be interviewing this time of year on Tuesday afternoons. And so your staff kind of learns your cadence, your office people, your team knows kind of what to expect. Whether it's dealing with discipline, somebody had put in discipline being a priority right now for them, and so can you set off a designated time that every Monday morning, once you kind of get school rolling, you're going to address the discipline, right? And obviously there's some discipline that has to be addressed in the moment, but those things that can be put off, we're going to address it on Monday. We're going to assign those detentions. We're going to assign those after schools and communicate and have those kind of theme days for time blocking. Another leadership lever is delegation, okay? And I know I've mentioned this already a couple times, but in this world of tightrope walking that you do as a school leader, balance is not a state that you achieve. It's something you've got to practice, and delegation is something you have to practice. I know early in my career, that would have been the block on the Eisenhower matrix that I identified with me having a hard time managing. Too often I wanted to try to do it all myself, and you just can't be as effective and you can't be as intentional when you do it all yourself. And so I want to just share you this example. Now, this time of the year, as you're wrapping up with your staff, a lot of you probably already have some type of end of year checklist for your staff. And Arlen, I do have this linked. So this can be a template of a resource. Many of you probably already have something very similar, but we would have our staff at the end of the year step through these to-dos, right? You got to get your grades finalized. You're going to go to, in North Carolina, they call it the data manager. You're going to go to the data manager, and she's going to sign off that you've got your grades finalized. That's that first highlighted name, okay? Not everything requires a signature or initials, but there are things that require a signature. Here's why I brought this to your attention, because what I want you to see is that there are 6 different people that are responsible for signing off on their stat on West Forsyth is the name of the school that I was just most currently at, on their end of the year checklist. Whose name do you not see? Right? The name you don't see, if you've forgotten, my last name was Spainhour, and you don't see the principal's name on the end of the year checklist. And again, I'm not telling you that if you've got a school of 300 kids and you've got a smaller staff and you've got a smaller office staff, then maybe you do have to have a little more hands-on. But I will encourage you to think about the things that you can delegate. The things that you can delegate so that other people can own some stuff. And it does provide, in my experience, it provides a great opportunity for some of your staff to be forced to go sit down with the data manager, and they end up having a conversation. It increases some culture. They're going to go to the media coordinator and sign out Chromebooks or check in the Chromebooks. It provides some level of team within your building as well. Okay. And Arlen, I see that. I'm not sure why that link is like that, but we can get that fixed on the copy and pasting. We'll definitely get these resources out to the folks. All right, some other strategies for delegation. I like a distribution chart. So we would have, here's the roles for our leaders, because we assign leads, whether that's for testing logistics or awards day, and then we would do like a weekly kind of report back. If you're in a high school, I was in a high school, the principal's not running the prom, right? But what we would do is, we would be in a scenario where we would have the prom coordinator report back to the principal, and as the prom's getting closer, those reports are getting more frequent, so that I could always have, you always want as a leader to have your pulse and your thumb on how things are going to turn out. Because I guarantee you, if the prom is not good, and you're not going to get phone calls and emails to the prom coordinator, they're coming directly to the leader, right, to the principal. So sharing some of that ownership and delegating that out is crucial. Great leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders. And so as you think about the balancing work and the tightrope work that you're walking right now, I think it's important that you're looking to create more leaders to help you walk it with each other, that you're not walking it by yourself, right? The next leadership lever is communication. We've talked a lot about this, so I'm going to just kind of hit the highlights. A weekly look ahead. And I just grabbed a screenshot. You can see I just did a quick Outlook search for week ahead on my inbox. And you can see that every Sunday, the principals that I supervise 20 principals currently. Every Sunday, those principals get a week ahead email from me. And it just kind of outlines the things that have a deadline to it. So I'm kind of prioritizing, helping them see these things are urgent and important because they have a deadline. And then I'm just kind of giving them some reminders. I encourage you to do that with your staff, with your admin team, having some type, and most of you probably are doing something to that nature. This time of year, I would encourage you to use, as you communicate your weekly messaging, use some of the closing out, the now and next reframing, so that you're saying, all right, well, we wrapped up awards day last week. Now we're headed towards the finish line and we've got XYZ to take care of, right? So you're using some of that language so people really understand if you're talking to your staff. If you're talking to your smaller circle of trusted, leadership circle, then I think it is important to make sure they understand where are you at as a principal with the hiring cycles. Where having that communication and openness so that they understand, okay, this is what we've got the master schedule, we've knocked that out, we're moving on to this, right? Visual calendars, I put that, we talked about the digital Outlook calendar or Google calendars, but having something, I've seen this in different places, having something, whether it's in a teacher workroom, whether it's in a leadership, a PLT room, or maybe even the principal's office, but having a big whiteboard that's got the big things that matter so that becomes very visual for you, I think is something that could really help, Here's something that I have used. Again, this is a template that we'll get out to you guys, but this is what I used during the hiring season. And this was pulled straight off of, I think, maybe 2022 or 23, but this is just something that helped me kind of keep it organized. I would be able to see the math department, and I could see the people that we interviewed. The folks that are in red are the folks that I knew that were leaving, whether they were retiring or just leaving my school. Those were the openings that we were going to have. Here's the people we interviewed, and then I would put, here's their replacement. So who was replacing C. Hill? It was going to be Miss Love Hobgood, right, on that math department. Who was replacing C. Scott? It was going to be Amanda Jackson. And then I would, just helped me to be able to see I don't have a replacement right now for Williams. And so that helps me prioritize, right? And again, this was something that I would be able to have ongoing throughout the year. So when you had some of those mid-year hires, I pointed those out. We would put those on there. Again, this was a way to keep my leadership team all on the same page, right? So that they would be able to see, okay, Myers is starting, and he's starting in March, right? I love to use to-do lists and checklists. I do think that sometimes folks use them too often. I think you got to have a purpose behind them. I've got some templates that I've used in the past that I'm willing to share with you guys so you can see, but so much of it is trying to keep your leadership team and trying to keep yourself on the same page. Again, it's not about trying to go at this alone. If you're wanting to keep balance, you do it best by bringing others with you. All right. And again, I think it's important to find the system that works for you. That less leadership lever that I identified was just reflection. And sometimes I think this is a component and this is a piece that we leave out. We get so busy that we forget to maybe write down how things went. And so again, I think it's important to try to find an opportunity to look at a situation and look at how it was handled by you, by your leadership team. What were the pluses, what were the minuses, what were those things that you would improve if you go through that process again. So that way, as you document that, you could take 2 minutes and just document it. And again, we're not going to put this in the chat, but if you were to think about the tightrope that you're walking right now, whether or not you're balanced, what are some current blind spots that you may have? And then as you think about what we've covered so far, what can be implemented next week, right? What can you take or what will you maybe adjust that would be implemented next week? And as you reflect on that, I would then ask you to write it down. Like right now, write it down. It helps to then be able to go back to it. So we're just going to take 2 minutes, maybe a minute and a half, and just write down things that you are balancing right now and maybe some blind spots and what you could implement. I see my good friend Andrew Murata on here. Welcome, Andrew. Having some time for reflection is important. And like I said, I think this is a component that often we miss. And a lot of times for your own personal growth, it's the component that can make the biggest difference. And so again, finding whatever strategy works for you, whether it's at the end of the act, whether it's at the end of the task, you got done with master scheduling, what went well, what were pluses, who all was involved in the process, and just writing that down. And whether it's on a piece of paper, or whether that's in Google Keep or on some kind of task list, some kind of memo, whatever it is that you would be able to then go back to it when master scheduling comes around next year, because it's going to come around again. And so having those reflection pieces is so important. Year to year, it will help you track the things that worked well, track the growth opportunities that you may have. And it's just good for the soul. It's good for the soul to always be, yes, Valerie, to always be improving and growing as a leader. Okay, I know I've given you a lot, but we've already, whether you realize it or not, we've already covered 3 of our learning outcomes. Okay, we've covered 3 of them. We're in the home stretch. Kentucky Derby was last week. We're in the home stretch now, and hopefully you're not. If you saw the Kentucky Derby, it was muddy and it was a rainy mess. Hopefully you're not getting rained on right now. You feel like you've been given some practical approaches to balancing the now and balancing the next. The last one that we're going to go through is some common pitfalls. So I'm going to go. We've got about 10-15 minutes. We'll go through some of the 5 common pitfalls that a lot of times we as leaders experience, and ways that we can overcome some of those. And the first, well, I had to hit pit. When I think pitfalls, I'm an '80s kid, right? So I immediately think about the arcade game Pitfall. So for those of you that are not in my generation, and this looks completely foreign to you, I apologize, but that's the 5 common pitfalls. All right, so here we go. What did you drive to work today? Right? Are you driving a fire truck to work? Because that's a common pitfall. Is walking into your building and not having a plan, but serving as a firefighter. So every little fire that comes up, every little, it becomes a sense of urgency. And you as the principal are the one that ends up having to deal and be the firefighter every single time. It's hard to keep balance in your day-to-day, in your week-to-week, if you're driving a fire truck to work every day. All right? So I challenge you, take those necessary steps to plan accordingly. Take those steps to really understand what the urgent things are, what the important things are, what can be delegated, so that you can drive yourself very intentionally throughout your day, that your time's not getting hijacked by those small fires that come up, because they will continue to come up. And if you allow yourself to be a firefighter, then the people in your building will continue to call upon you to do that. Okay? Second one. Number 2 common pitfall is the empty parking lot. All right. If your parking lot looks like this, with all of this space out there, that you haven't parked some of those less important items, you haven't scheduled some of those less important items in the parking lot, then you're going to have a hard time finding that right balance. Okay. So take those items, take those things that, when you ask yourself, does it have to be done by me, right? Am I the right leader to handle this issue, to solve this problem? Maybe it needs to be parked and put aside, and you can write that 2-minute email back to the parent or back to the staff member and say, I appreciate your comments. I'm going to get back to you in 24 hours and we will look at this. Or I'm going to let my assistant principal reach out to you. If you feel like it's unresolved after that, let me know, right? But you are using that parking lot to be able to keep your focus where it needs to be during this crazy busy time. You're walking that tightrope. You got to stay balanced, okay? And I'll give you an example. If you've been to Disney World, if you've gone down to Orlando, Florida, now it's a crazy place and it's super expensive, but as a father of 4, I've taken my young ones down to Disney World about 10 years ago or so. But when you go to the Magic Kingdom at Disney World, you actually drive and you park your car into the parking lot at Disney World, and you can't even see the park. You can't see the Magic Kingdom. You can't see Cinderella's castle from the parking lot, right? That important thing, you actually have to park your car and then you go get on a tram a lot of times, and that tram takes you to either a boat or a monorail that will then be a 5 to 7 minute drive, and that dumps you off at the Magic Kingdom. Now, you might think, well, why is Disney doing that? Well, I think they're doing that so your car's parked so far away that you don't want to leave. And because the more time you spend there, the more money you spend, right? But they'll tell you, what Disney will tell you is that when you're in their Magic Kingdom, they want you to forget where you parked. They don't want you to be thinking about what you have left behind. They want your full focus to be on the experience of being in the Magic Kingdom and enjoying the park. They don't want you thinking about the car, right? And so, again, as you think about one of the pitfalls of keeping yourself balanced as a leader, if you're needing to really dive in and focus and spend some deep work on time, then you're going to have to use your parking lot and put some things over there that will allow you to focus deeply on the work and the experience of planning for next year, so that you can walk away from it feeling accomplished through that experience. All right, third common pitfall is do it yourself. Yes, maybe I should have put a red Solo cup in there this time of the year. Y'all might be thinking red Solo cup would be better fit, but I didn't know how Arlen would feel about that. So I went with a blue Solo cup, and you can tell that, if you try to go solo, then that cup's going to tip over, okay? And so you do need to ask yourself, as you are presented with different items, who else can help you, right? If it's, we've talked about master scheduling, we talked about hiring, a strategy for hiring, for example, is maybe you're not the one that's solely responsible for reviewing all the resumes. Maybe you assign that task, and then the reviewed resumes come to you and you actually see the top 5 that your AP picked out, right? So it's assigning some of those tasks so that you have some of that shared ownership, and ask yourself, who else might be able to do this? Who else might be able to help me do this, and so that we can be effective and intentional, right? The fourth common pitfall, going back to the 80s, y'all, the Connect 4 game, right? Too often this time of year, we feel disconnected from our why. I know for me, during the March, April months, as you are dealing with allotments, you're dealing with future planning, but you're also dealing with the stresses of the current school year. I found myself in my office more than I wanted to be, and definitely more than I was in the fall during this spring season. And so being intentional about reconnecting with your why, right? Finding a dedicated time to get yourself around your people, around your staff, around your teachers, around your students, so that you can reconnect with your why. It helps ground you in the work so that you can bring yourself back to the focus of why you're doing what you're doing, right? You're running around, you're walking that tightrope for that group of students to have such a positive experience. Be present in those big moments. When you go to a field day, don't go to a field day and just be on your phone answering text messages and emails. Be present in that moment. It will help you connect to your why, and it will ground you and reflect and provide that reflection for you as you move forward. Okay? The last common pitfall, and Arlen, I know we're kind of wrapping up here, but I'll stick with the game theme, and this is a game called Boggle. And I don't know if any of you have ever played this game, but it's got clearly a 60-second timer, hourglass timer, and you would shake up this game with all those letters. Those dice have different letters on it. You would shake up this game, and all the letters would just fall where they were, and then the people that are playing the game would try to make the most words possible out of those letters that are connected to one another in 60 seconds, right? And so how does this relate to the season of leadership right now? Make sure you're not playing Boggle. Make sure you're not waiting for the dice to kind of fall, for somebody to just shake it all up and the dice to fall, and then you're having to make the best decisions based on where everything fell. You want to be strategic through this process, through the end of the year. You want to be strategic planning for next year. And if you can place the letters without feeling like you're having to shake them all up, then you feel like you're more in control. You're not being reactive to just the craziness of the year. You have a plan in place, and you're able to strategically figure things out with a lot more intention. So when you find yourself playing Boggle, and there's going to be times where the crazy things happen, But the more you stay in this, the more you develop systems and processes that work for your building and your people. Think system and processes, then the more you're going to feel like you're doing things not against this timer of 60 seconds hourglass, and you're just watching that just drift away and you're like, am I going to be able to get it all done? But you feel like you've got a plan of action. And hopefully we've been able to talk through and provide you some things that will get you at least thinking about some of those plans of actions that you can take into this busy time. Because as I mentioned, every school leader will have this busy time every single year. It's part of the job, all right? So here those are summed up, your common pitfalls to avoid. And folks, I really appreciate your time today. We do have some time as we wrap up, I believe, Arlen, to allow them to ask some questions. And I'll finish with wrapping up our story on Charles Blondin. Remember the tightrope walker, okay? The tightrope walker from the States to the Canadian side, as I said, he was there for like a week and walked across Niagara Falls multiple times. Crowd would go wild. One of the last days that he was there, he took a wheelbarrow across, and it was a special made wheelbarrow, right? Now, legend has it that he looked down at the crowd after he wheelbarrowed across with, I think he had 300 pounds of cement that he wheelbarrowed across. He then looked down at the crowd and said, do you believe I can take a person across the Niagara Falls on this tightrope? And the crowd goes wild. Yes, you can do it. You can do it. You're the great Blondin. And then he looked at the crowd and he said, who's going to volunteer to come in the wheelbarrow? Right? Who's going to volunteer to come in the wheelbarrow? I'll take you across. And legend has it, nobody volunteered. And I will say this about legend and legacy. For Charles Blondin, I'm telling a story about him over 100 years, 150 years later, right? And we're telling a story about him in 1859 walking across the Niagara Falls. He was a legend because he was so masterful at the talent of walking across a tightrope, right? You might be a legend because you are masterful at balancing the now and the what's next. Maybe you're so talented in that. I know I was not, right? But what you can do in your sphere of influence as a school leader is you can leave a legacy. The difference between legend and legacy is a legend is a craftsman, so talented that people talk about him during his time. Think about some of the athletes that we have. Think about some of the artists that we have. They're legends. A legacy, people are talking about their influence and their impact. And you can be both, right? I would say that Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, they're both, right? You as a school leader, you're going to leave a legacy. Your sphere of influence, your impact on your building, on your people, on the kids and families that you interact with are going to leave a legacy. I encourage you, this time of the year can be crazy, but I encourage you to stay the course. And you can create that balance. Remember, you have to be intentional to create that balance, okay? So I appreciate the time, Arlen. If any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And you can put them in the chat here, or Arlen's going to follow up with these templates and these resources, and he'll follow up with some of my contact information as well. And you feel free to contact me directly after the session here. Arlen, I'm turning it back over to you.
Kevin, thank you so much. What a great way to wrap up the school year with this presentation. All these wonderful tips and strategies for getting organized and heading into next school year. Great job, everybody, for your participation as well in the chat. We've got a few minutes left here with Kevin, so if you have any questions, any reactions, things that might have come up for you as he was going through these tips and strategies, we would love to hear from you in the chat. First one I see coming in from our friend Andrew is, what are you reading these days, Kevin?
Yeah, so I actually just got an Andy Andrews book. I believe the author is Andy Andrews, and the title escapes me. It just came in last week, and I read the first chapter. The I don't know if any of you school leaders know Andy Andrews, um, but it's I'll get that title. I'm gonna have to look that up. Traveler's Gift. Yes, that's what it is. Traveler's Gift. Uh, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's great. And we're reading as a staff here at IP, we're reading a book called The Power of Moments, which is perfect for this webinar because the end of the school year is a powerful moment for staff and students, and it's about making those memorable for people in a positive way so it sticks with them as they go throughout their educational journey.
Absolutely, Arlen. And, I think somebody put in the chat about, this time of year you're doing a lot of celebrations. You're
Right.
honoring the retirements that you have in your building. You're celebrating teachers and the work that's been done. And I mentioned this about field day, but there's nothing. I was at a field day just last week on Friday, and I saw the principal out there, and the principal spent most of their time on their phone. I walked over there to them and said, get off your phone. I said it a little more nicely than that, but it's so important as you do celebrations, you have awards days, you have opportunities to really be present and in the moment. As a school leader, you're being watched. Whether it's by the kids or whether it's by the families, the stakeholders that are around. At that awards day, at that fifth grade promotional ceremony, if you're spending time on your phone, just be very careful and make sure that you are. Grounded and present and enjoying the moment, right?
Yeah, I definitely try and think about that. As a parent, it's very easy at the end of a workday to want to just zone out on your phone. But if you've got kids around, there's some moments that you don't want to miss there. So
Absolutely.
that's very important as an educator, as a parent, to be exactly where your feet are, as Andrew Murata put it in the chat. All right, let me just scroll through and see if there's anything else. Denise said, excellent tips and strategies that can be put into place immediately. And Kevin, I personally loved all the gaming references you had built into the pit, even from the Pitfalls arcade game on through. I thought that was a great way to connect.
Yeah. Well, the reality is when you try to look for a Boggle reference,
Mhm.
those images usually come up blurry. There's not many new Boggle games. I don't know if they're even still making the game or not.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in a long time.
Well, again, I thank you.
Yes, thanks. So great to have you again, Kevin. Hopefully we can get something on the schedule for next year. We're starting to put together our live webinar schedule as we speak, as we wrap up this school year and look into next. This is our final live webinar of the 24-25 school year, but be looking to edleadersnetwork.org for more starting September in the fall of next year. We will kick off our live webinar event, and we hope to see you all there. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.